busy bye week here for the Baltimore Ravens. Luke Jones joins us now. We were at the Meadowlands on Sunday, both of the last two Sundays. One was summer, one was winter. One was green, one was blue. They both had very unhappy endings if you're a Baltimore Ravens fan. And now the Ravens trying to pick the pieces up here during a bye week. John Harbaugh said they'd get back after it and work. Luke Jones joins us now. He, of course, our Ravens reporter. You can follow him out on Twitter at Baltimore Luke, as well as Luke at WNST.net. Look, a lot of pieces to pick up here. And until they get some of their best players who may be long in the tooth, but certainly the best players they have at this point, until they get them back on the field, I don't know that there's going to be any relief in Purple Land, my man. There are too many guys missing. That has to change in the next 2 weeks before the Pittsburgh Steelers get here.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear as it stands right now, they're not nearly good enough. I mean, they just aren't. You look at the offensive line, you look at some of the pieces that were missing on defense. I mean, it's a lot to overcome when you have real questions that even at full strength, how good they might be, right? I mean, we talked about how they started 3-0, and at that point they were really only missing Elvis Dumervil, but you know there were still some questions as far as how real that was. So it's clear with the number of injuries they have out right now, you know, guys that are missing right now, that they're not good enough. But, you know, get some of these other guys back and, okay, maybe they can be decent then. Maybe they can find some things that they've been chasing, you know, more consistency on offense, clearly. The defense getting back to where they were really the first 4 or 5 games where they weren't giving up nearly as many big plays as they did the last couple weeks. And maybe you can settle in and get on a little bit of a roll. But until that happens, I think it's clear this team, as it stands presently, is not good enough. I mean, it just isn't. I don't think they're, you know, the 0-4 is indicative of what they are for the entire season. I mean, I don't think they're going to go 3-13, but yeah, at the same time, if they don't find some health, if they don't,
they could though. I mean, they could.
I mean, they could. I mean, it's.
Well, I mean, Cleveland's possible. A game they should not lose. The rest of these games, dare I say, are losable games, right? Some of them are obviously winnable games, too. I mean, the New England game feels to be a very, very tall task, even at full strength.
Right.
But the rest of these games, and Pittsburgh coming in with no Roethlisberger, and maybe the Ravens would have C.J. Mosley, Steve Smith, Ladarius Webb, a healthier Jimmy Smith. You know, maybe these guys could come back. I mean, I still think Suggs, Yanda, you know, a couple of these injuries feel like, boy, they could be lingering longer. But a couple of them also feel like they're going to be a stronger team against the Steelers physically than they were against the Jets on Sunday. I believe that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But, you know, at the same time, does Roethlisberger play? You know, Landry Jones at times has looked okay. So, you know, and let's face it, the Ravens lost to the combination of Geno Smith and Ryan Fitzpatrick.
He's no Charlie Batch, I'll tell you that.
Sunday, right, sure. But, I mean, it's, at this point, nothing's a gimme. I mean, you know, if you want to chalk up the Browns as a win, okay, you know, fine.
That gets the 4.
You know, they're terrible, but you know, at the same time, I mean, this Ravens team has lost 4 in a row, so there's not a whole lot that you feel really that, you know, all that confident about. But get healthy, see if Marty Morningwig over the bye week can find something, because I mean, it's clear, you know, for as decent as the offense may have looked, at least the passing game looked in the first half on Sunday. You know, Joe Flacco had 200 passing yards. At the same time, they still didn't get inside the red zone. And you look at the second half, you know, 27 plays for 42 yards. I mean, as much as everyone just wanted to kill Mark Trestman for ineffective offense, I mean, you know, that was as bad, if not worse, than anything we saw in Trestman's offense.
Did they not run a play in the red zone, or am I nuts?
No, they didn't. They didn't.
They did not run one play in the red zone.
No, I mean, think about it. Their touchdown was the recovery on the botched snap in the end zone by Chris Moore, and they kicked field goals.
It's kind of like the Major League moment, you know. One hit, one goddamn hit, you know, literally. I mean, it's like, yeah. How can you play 60 minutes and not run a play in the red zone? That's incredible.
It really is. I mean, they, you know, look at the final stats.
Even Trent Dilfer ran plays in the red zone, man.
Yeah. Look at the final stats. I mean, they were 0 for 0 inside the red zone because they never made it inside there. And you know, the second half, you know, barely even made it into Jets territory very often. So, I mean, it's, can Morningwig find some things? Can they get healthy? Can they get Steve Smith back? Can they get Marshall Yanda back? Can those guys, when they come back, play at a high enough level to make a difference? I think those are fair questions, considering the injuries that they're dealing with. And, I mean, it's just, they've got to, to me, we've talked about so many different issues, and rightfully so, from coaching to personnel, the front office putting together the roster to begin with, mistakes, penalties, giving up big plays on defense. But the common theme I continue to come back to, and maybe it's looked different from week to week. Some weeks maybe they've run the ball pretty well. Other weeks they haven't been able to pass protect. Some weeks they've pass protected okay. The pass protection wasn't awful on Sunday, but the run blocking was, and it's the offensive line. I mean, they've been missing Stanley, they've been missing Yanda these last couple games, but even the first few weeks when they had a healthy offensive line, other than John Urschel, and you can debate Alex Lewis or John Urschel at left guard, I'm pretty unmoved by that at this point. I mean, John.
Well, we heard a lot about Urschel the last couple of years. He was supposed to be the guy grooming to be the guy that was going to be around for a couple of years. He hasn't been that guy yet.
Right. I mean, he struggled big time on Sunday. So, but my point being, even when they had a healthy Stanley and a healthy Yanda the first few weeks, that offensive line still wasn't firing on all cylinders, still wasn't as good as it needed to be. And let's face it, I mean, for as much as we've talked about wide receiver and safety and pass rush and all these different positional needs really since Super Bowl 47, a common theme has been their offensive line's been pretty bad in 3 of those 4 years. The 1 year it wasn't bad, when Gary Kubiak and Rick Dennison were in town. That they found it with the outside zone and the stretch, and they really
and the right running back too. By the way,
yeah, sure. So, but 2013 offensive line was a disaster. 2015 offensive line had its issues big time, and Eugene Monroe not being on the field kind of headlined that. And 2016, once again, offensive line having major issues. So, do you try to look at a positive and say, okay, well, 3 of the last 4 games they had actually run the ball pretty well when they'd run it. Sunday, of course, didn't run much and had gained absolutely nothing when they did, save for the one Terrence West run wiped out by the Alex Lewis holding penalty. But they have to find something with the offensive line. I mean, it starts up front. That's such a cliche, but it's so true. And this offense has been playing with a well below average offensive line all year, and when you have just solid skill position players, but you don't have special skill position players, and you have a quarterback who is certainly capable of playing great football, but if you don't have enough around him, is not going to be that guy that can overcome so many deficiencies. You need to be better up front, and that's that first and foremost has to be the biggest issue for this Ravens offense right now is fixing that line. I mean, it's just and it's been the common problem for 3 of the last 4 years since Super Bowl 47, and we've talked so much about they've only made the playoffs one time over that stretch, and imagine that it's the 1 year their offensive line performed at a really high level. So we can talk about all the different issues, and we will continue to. But
we got 2 weeks to do it this time around, right?
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
In between World Series games, of course.
That's the ugliness of losing 4 straight going into the bye and losing specifically on Sunday. I mean, you just kind of stew, and the Ravens are going to do that.
Well, Sunday's one of the ugliest losses in franchise history. Not just that it's Harbaugh's first time at 4 in a row, not just that it's to an awful New York Jets team and it comes at a bye period, not that it comes with all these injuries, but, I mean, you got 6 yards of rushing in a game. I don't know what to say. I mean, there's only 5 numbers less than that, right? I mean, I saw LaDainian Tomlinson making fun of the Ravens well into the night on Sunday night. I was the goof up at 1 o'clock in the morning after the game Sunday, after working all night. And, they put tape down on the, 6 yards. He's like, you got 6 yards as a team. Yeah, it's an embarrassment. I mean, literally. I mean, it was an embarrassing loss for the organization.
No, there's no doubt about it. I mean, where it ranks as far as worst losses in franchise history, I don't know. There were some bad ones during the Billick era, and I mean, certainly early on.
That Miami loss, that was one of the worst teams of all time, right? That Billick lost to. But this is up there. I mean, this Jets team's not going to win a lot of games.
Well, and it comes back to, look, was this must-win in the sense of, when you're talking Week 16 and you're trying to prevent being knocked out of playoff contention? No. But I think, and we talked about this a little bit in our post-game discussion as well, this team's psyche, I think, is fragile right now. And it goes back to how much they lost last year. I think if they had gotten a win on Sunday, no matter how it looked, an ugly 1-point win, 10-9, think of the ugliest scenario you could think of that would still be a win, then they can hang their hats on that and say, okay, we got a win. We stopped the bleeding of a 3-game losing streak. With the fact that Pittsburgh lost to New England, they would have been tied for first place in the division, as underwhelming as the AFC North is.
And we're going to get healthier, right?
Yeah,
I mean, and we're going to place the Steelers without Roethlisberger, we think, right? So there'll be some thought of, hey, we're going to be in first place in a week and a half, then we're going to see the Browns and take a little rest, and here we go, right? We're in this thing, right?
Everything would have felt that much better, even though all the issues we're talking about now still would have applied, other than the fact that we wouldn't have been saying they're on a 4-game losing streak. But all the other issues still would have been there. But you'd say, hey, you stop the bleeding. These guys get a little bit of a winning taste back in their mouths, and they go into the bye getting a little bit of a breather physically and mentally. Now, that's all they're thinking about. And these guys will get away. I mean, for anyone saying they should practice all week, well, the CBA prohibits that. They're required to have 4 straight days off.
Take away their water, put a sack on their back, make them run in circles.
Yeah.
I mean, the stupidity I see in social media, in, around, during, after, and a lot of it really is this now calling for, we need to get rid of Flacco, we need to get rid of Harbaugh, we need to blow it up. I'm not saying that Bisciotti won't do that. I'm not saying that 20 other organizations wouldn't do that. I don't know how much you blame Harbaugh for not having players on the field. I don't know how much you blame Bisciotti, because Bisciotti's not some absentee cat here, right? Like, they all get on the plane, they all fly down to Florida at the end of the year. Bisciotti's no dummy. He knows all these guys are over 30. He knew that waiting on Steve Smith, while noble for the whole team, was a risk. Thinking that Dennis Pitta was going to come back, I mean, he has far exceeded anything we could have expected for him. So there's this little miracle, in number 88 over there, who's actually playing relatively well and playing relatively pain-free at this point. But, I don't think that you could look at Terrell Suggs or Smith or Doomerville or any of the other age of guys, including Ladarius Webb, which was always an experiment at safety to my eyes. But, Bisciotti checked off on all this. It's not like this stuff happens in a vacuum and he's not in on those parts of the decisions to give 30-somethings big money and to count on them. So there will come a comeuppance if this team finishes 6-10 and goes the wrong way and never competes, that when it comes time to say who's responsible, I don't think Bisciotti's going to have any problem saying, I checked off on all these old guys being here. I checked off on having our best football players out there, and they weren't there. Now, whether he hangs Ozzie or John they're not going to hang Flacco at this point because they can't replace him. Right. But I would think the same thought about Harbaugh and Ozzie is, who does Steve want running the company? And, I don't know how he feels about those guys. I do know that Ozzie has been challenged in bringing talent in here the last 5 years. That's just a fact. I mean, it really is.
I completely agree. I think you look at the draft. Over the last 4 years, I mean, really, in the post-Super Bowl era, I mean, just look at their first-round picks. Matt Elam, dud. C.J. Mosley, good. Don't know if he's going to be a perennial Pro Bowler, but you'll sign off on that. You'll check off on that.
You want C.J. Mosley on your team.
But at the same time, and I'll provide this reminder, it was the year after they drafted Arthur Brown, who they traded up to get in the second round. So was that already trying to remedy a mistake from the previous year where, you're trading up in the second round for a guy, and then you take another inside linebacker right after that. So,
but not only that, I mean, Arthur Brown wasn't just
he didn't get on the field
a bust. He never got on the field.
Right,
when you get a second-round draft pick that never takes the field, and it's not because of some Sergio Kindle incident, something that is legitimately, he's out there trying, he's healthy, he's there for 4 years, and
that kills you.
It's incredible.
I mean, that's a major void because, even if you replace it, as the Ravens essentially did with C.J. Mosley, that's still then that first-round pick of Mosley could have been used for something else.
Well, they brought Eric Weddle in to make up for the Terrence Brooks and the Matt Elam situation, right?
And the other 4 veteran safeties that they signed over that, in the post-Ed Reed era. So
Huff, all those guys, right?
Yeah, so I mean, it's very clear that they've had their issues there, big time. That doesn't take John Harbaugh off the hook entirely. I mean, we've seen the issues with time management. I mean, Ravens blew a timeout on their opening drive, punting the football away on Sunday. That's unacceptable. You can't do that. And they continually do those types of things. We talked about the fake field goal a couple weeks ago. There's been stuff like that. There have been other debatable decisions. 4th and goal from the 1 against the Giants. I didn't disagree with that. I didn't love the play call, but there have been plenty of head scratching decisions made this year, and that is on John Harbaugh. And when you have a team that's making the kind of mistakes that these players have made and committing the penalties over and over, that is a reflection of coaching. It's a reflection on the players as well, don't get me wrong, but it is a reflection on coaching. So if I'm Steve Bisciotti and just playing the hypothetical what-if game, I do look at this, and what you said is a very cogent point in that Steve Bisciotti did sign off on this, and keep in mind...
And understood the risk, too. We all did, right?
Oh, no doubt. Yeah. And keep in mind, Steve Bisciotti was very even-keeled, level-headed, not accepting in the standpoint of that it was good enough, but was very level-headed about last year's 5-11 campaign, to the point where some of us were watching and we're kind of wondering, is there enough urgency here that they just had a 5-11 season? Is it really all about injuries? Is it really all because Terrell Suggs got hurt in the way that they laid out that narrative? In a way that kind of made you feel, is there some complacency here? And I thought that, and I wrote that. We discussed that back in January. I thought that was a very fair reaction to have to that. Now, I wasn't saying that you should call for Ozzie Newsome to be fired or John Harbaugh to be fired after one 5-11 season, but there was a certain sense of we're fine that Steve Bisciotti laid out in my mind. Talked about the positional needs that they have any given year, guys that they want to bring in, but there was a very real sense that they weren't going to blow this thing up. And now, getting into it now, 7 games into 2016 and being 3-4 and losing 4 in a row and not playing exactly a murderer's row of opponents through the first 7 weeks.
It's the first time the schedule's been kind to them, quite frankly, in a long time.
You do wonder if maybe they need to make more changes this past offseason. And I'm not saying necessarily blow up the entire roster, but let's face it, they more just tinkered. They brought in Weddle, they brought in Watson, they brought in Wallace. They got rid of Eugene Monroe. But they
clearly weren't happy with Tressman. I mean, they canned him 3 weeks into the season, right?
So
literally.
But I guess getting back to what's going through Steve Bisciotti's mind, does he look at this and say it is a major personnel problem, it is a problem with Ozzie Newsome and the front office and the scouting department, or do I think this roster is good enough and it's an issue with John Harbaugh, or is it a case where Steve Bisciotti might say, all right, these are still my guys. Ozzie Newsome's been here long before I was here, and he has that utmost respect for him in the same way that Art Modell did. And John Harbaugh was his guy. Remember, Billick was here when was already here when Bisciotti arrived. As far as minority owner and then taking over. So Harbaugh was his hire. Perhaps it's a case where he says, I still believe in those guys, but we need to change our organizational philosophy. What we are trying to look at in terms of identifying football players and putting together a roster and drafting clearly is not working in the same way that it did, say, 7 years ago and before. So we need to figure that out, and I think they're the guys to do it. But this is going to be something that needs to be completely remade. This isn't a tinker and add this guy, subtract this guy, and think we're going to be fine. This is going to be an undertaking. The good news is you have a franchise quarterback, and he has more job security than anyone else in this organization right now because his contract dictates that. Joe Flacco is not going anywhere. So you can look at that as a plus, and perhaps Steve Bisciotti, sits down with his general manager, his head coach, his scouts, his front office, and says, we need to build around our quarterback better. Let's face it. Look at this offensive line right now. Unacceptable. Look at this group of wide receivers. You have a 37-year-old guy with Hall of Fame credentials, but isn't going to be around after this year. And he's still the guy that Joe Flacco has to lean on the most because other guys just aren't as dependable enough. Mike Wallace has been a nice addition. There's no doubt about that. But is he a number one receiver? No. Beyond that, you have Kamar Aiken, a former practice squad guy who, again, nice complimentary piece, but he's not the man. He's not the go-to guy in crunch time. And you have Rashad Perriman, who at this point is disappointing and very uncertain as far as whether he's going to live up to being a first-round pick. And at tight end, Dennis Pitt has been a nice story, but he's not Rob Gronkowski. So you need to build more around your franchise quarterback, and I think that needs to become the philosophy. Go back to Super Bowl 47. We talked about this a lot. We're going to use this isn't revisionist history. I thought this at the time. I'm going to bring up the same old example. The Ravens won with offense in the 2012 postseason. Joe Flacco had a historic run. They re-signed him, and then what did they do? They proceeded to go back to their old formula of trying to build a defense. And to me, it should have been way more about continuing to build around Joe Flacco. It should have been not getting rid of Anquan Bolden and not replacing him. So, I think from an identity standpoint, from a philosophical standpoint, perhaps that's what really needs to be revisited here in a major way. And for Steve Bisciotti, if that is the case, he needs to decide if Ozzie Newsome is still the right guy for that job, and John Harbaugh is still the right guy for that job. And I think Steve has a long memory, but at the same time, what they've had since the Super Bowl, where they're possibly staring at their third non-playoff season in 4 years, that's below the line. That's below the standard that this organization has set for a really long time. So I think as much as anything, if you're Steve Bisciotti, you're looking at the big picture and saying, as far as our roadmap, as far as our playbook, so to speak, for what it takes to get back to winning a Super Bowl, does that need to be severely adjusted? And if that's the case, he has to decide if Ozzie and John are going to continue to be the guys to carry that out.
He is Luke Jones, Baltimore Luke, out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. The Ravens on the field briefly this week, taking a little time off this weekend per the CBA, as well as the bye weekend. They'll get back after it next week with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Meantime, Luke, the bye comes at a nice time for those of us who love the grand old game, correct?
Yeah.
I have not given you any opportunity. We've been talking so much football. We haven't talked at all about the World Series, Cubs and Tribe. It's going to be a pretty good week and a half of staying up late and watching baseball. I'm going to be in New York this weekend watching as well. This is a good World Series. There's an interesting group of people. There's interesting storylines with Tito and Epstein and Chicago and Cleveland and the cities and the Midwest and their long-standing tradition of sucking at baseball.
It's amazing. And I think I said this to you when we were talking about this at some point in the last week or so. Think about any baseball fan, 70 or at the age of 70 or younger, and maybe those 20 and under at this point. Maybe it's not as good of an indication because the Indians, were pretty darn good in the mid to late 90s, and they've had some runs here and there. But by and large, most baseball fans between the age of 20 and 70, if you ask them, think bad baseball teams, they think of the Chicago Cubs. And they think of the Cleveland Indians. And it's just amazing to think that they're going to face off in a World Series where...
Yeah, we live long enough to see this, Luke. It's amazing, right?
Yeah, one of these teams, the Indians, it's been 68 years since they last won a World Series. The Cubs, 108 years. Cubs, 70 years since they've been in a World Series. It's amazing to think... this World Series is going to be the first televised World Series to feature the Chicago Cubs. The Chicago Cubs are playing in their first World Series since Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier. I mean, there's so many layers to this, but bringing it back to the action on the field, you look at how these two teams pitched throughout the season. Now, Cleveland right now with their starting rotation being what it is, and Corey Kluber's going in Game 1, and but there's so much uncertainty with Bauer and some of the guys that got hurt late. We
did see him bleed all over the place last week, right?
Yeah.
So,
but that bullpen has just been incredible to the point that the Indians batted 168 in the ALCS and they won in 5 games. That's just amazing to think that. And then on the flip side, you have the Cubs with their rotation that is just it's set. They pitch so well. We know about Lester, who, by the way, for all the talk about Madison Bumgarner, John Lester doesn't get enough credit for how he's pitched in his postseason career. That's just my opinion. And Bumgarner's unbelievely.
Well, he'll get his chance to win a couple of games this week and have a parade in Chicago. John Lester pitches them to a World Series. The Hall of Very Good will be beckoning for him, right?
Yeah, but he's someone who just came up huge, and you look at what Kyle Hendricks was able to do, in the clincher. That Arrieta. Just go down the list. The Lackey, a guy who has postseason experience. But that Cubs team, and they might be getting Schwarber back now, which is just going to make that lineup that much better. As far as him being able to DH potentially. So it's just this is going to be a really fun series. And you mentioned the Francona Epstein thing. That's something interesting for Red Sox fans to marinate on. But this is just going to be fun. You have two teams who. We saw the Indians in the series twice in 95 and 97. That 97 team, I still have a tough time with because I was so convinced the Orioles were the best team in baseball in 97 and were going to win it all.
They were for 6 months. But
yeah, for me, other than acknowledging I was 2 weeks old when the 83 team won it all, that 97 team was the best Orioles team of my lifetime, other than being in diapers 2 weeks old. That 97 Indians team kind of just, I have a bitter feeling toward them.
Well, they didn't win. So, here we are 20 years later, and they're still trying to win. And they're probably going to lose, right? The Cubs are probably going to win here, right?
We don't know. But, if you're asking me to state a favorite, it's got to be the Cubs. The Cubs, they were the best team in baseball all year long. So, but, it's just going to be so much fun to watch this. The fan base in Chicago, seeing a 90-year-old female Cubs fan sitting in the stands of Game 6 Saturday night, seeing that throughout the course of this series, it's pretty cool. And on the flip side, Cleveland, as much as we make fun of the Browns, and we'll continue to because the Browns are god-awful, you think about it, on the heels of LeBron bringing a title to Cleveland back in June, now you have the possibility of the Indians winning a World Series, and just amazing to watch. And frankly, I'm looking forward to watching Andrew Miller pitch more. That was just what he was able to do against Toronto was just, and give Cody Allen plenty of credit as well. It wasn't just him, but Andrew Miller just unbelievable to watch. I love Zach Britton. Had a phenomenal season. A wild card non-appearance aside, but Andrew Miller, the way that Francona has used him. Is just, it's kind of revolutionary, right? We're so used to, over the last 25 years in baseball, your closer pitches the 9th inning, your setup man pitches the 8th inning, you have a 7th inning guy, and Francona's thrown that out the window, and postseason's different. I don't think you can manage this way nearly as easily in a 162
Nor would you
season.
want to, right?
Yeah. You can't do that, but when you're in this kind of format, I've loved the fact that you've seen him not even hesitate to go to a guy like Miller in the 5th or 6th inning and let him pitch 2 2/3 innings. It's just, it's been really fun to watch and really looking forward to seeing that Cleveland bullpen, what they can do against this Cubs offense that, the Cubs offense has had some stretches where they didn't swing quite as well in the postseason, but what that offense is capable of doing. But the Indians completely stifled that Blue Jays lineup that is pretty good, so we'll see. I think the Cubs are, the favorite, but I wouldn't be surprised if Cleveland walks away with a victory. And I will say this: having the rest that they had, they were able to rest up that bullpen, and we'll see how their rotation shakes out. It's going to be really interesting. But if they can get that, some semblance of a rotation back in order, don't sleep on the Indians. And I want to throw this name out there. As much as the Indians struggled overall, Francisco Lindor, one of my favorite young players to watch in the game. He had a terrific ALCS, and he's a guy that we talk so much about the Machados and the Correas and the Nolan Arenados. Lindor as good as any of those guys as far as what he brings with the bat, and a terrific defensive shortstop as well. So I like the fact you're going to get to see him on a national stage, because he's played quite well with the spotlight on him this October.
By the time the Ravens get together with the Steelers next weekend here in Baltimore, and of course the Tribe will be coming in, or not the Tribe, the Browns will be coming in. The Tribe could be having their own parade. They're raising a flag in Cleveland. We'll be watching baseball, some basketball. I was at the Caps game the other day. Chill out, everybody. Take a week. Take a breather. I'm going to New York this weekend. You can follow our journey as well as Luke's journey on the backfields in Owings Mills. He is Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. The Buy a Toyota Audio Vault is there 24 hours a day for anything you miss here at WNST. Just download the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear. Morning newspaper ships to you at 7 a.m. to your email inbox, digitally, and brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. And if there's any breaking news at all with the Ravens, with the Orioles after the World Series is over, on the pitching coach situation in the offseason and winter meetings, all that good stuff, you'll get it all first on the WNST Tech Service. That is brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And Dennis will be here driving you home from 3 until 5 this Thursday and every Thursday, even before and after Halloween. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports. From Chicago to Cleveland and trying to pick up the pieces from an ugly Sunday afternoon at the Meadowlands. That's 2 in a row if you're counting, Ravens fans. Lost to the Giants last week, and ugly